All right, we're going to jump into this next section here. We're going to talk for a little bit about serving velocities, about trajectory, and about zones. If you guys look in your booklets, there's a handout that I think was included in your booklet. Does anybody have this handout? It has a little graph at the beginning. Does anybody have that handout in there? Yes, everybody got that? Was that a yes? All right, we're going to go from that, and we're going to use this thing. So pull out your pens and follow along with me on some of the things that we're going to do. What we would need to first understand is that there are three main elements to having an effective serve: velocity, trajectory, and location. And it's important to note that in this presentation, we are going to be almost primarily talking about a float serve. And so the fourth thing that is absolutely vital is a dead float. When we're talking about a dead float ball, we're going to talk about some physics in here for a second. You need to understand that when we're talking about a dead float, we mean an absolutely dead ball. A ball that is spinning in any direction whatsoever is causing lift. And that's going to translate into a ball that's trackable. It's got a trajectory that's going to be able to be trackable. We want to produce a ball that is erratic. And the only way we can produce an erratic ball is with a absolutely dead float. So, one of the things that we want to do first is we want to start to identify what the proper velocity is for an athlete. And I will tell you right now, it used to be that we thought faster is better, no matter what. But I think I'm going to be able to show you by using a little bit of data that that isn't necessarily true for every athlete. So if I could get some athletes out on the court here, we're going to set up a bit of a serve pass. Ladies, I need 3 passers and 3 servers. I need some people shagging as well. Athletes, if you could run on here. So I need 3 passers in their lanes, and I need 3 servers here. All right, so for the purposes of you running this in your gym, we're going to grab our pens and we're going to make some marks here. We're going to talk about this. What I want you to do is I want you to start serving balls. And I want you to serve one, then the next, then the next. Okay? I want to keep switching it up, though, so if you serve this person, serve that one next time, then the middle, then the other one. I want a random sampling of passers from your serves, okay? We're all going to serve from the middle of the court, and if you're a jump server, go ahead, and we want float serves only, go ahead and jump. If you're a standing server, go ahead and stand. But we want to encourage you to hit your strongest, hardest serve that is under the antenna in control. So that does not mean go crazy at this ball. In control, okay? And then I want you to play around with that speed, pushing your control and easing up on that ball. And I want you to watch that serve. So now what we're going to do, go ahead and let's start. We're going to treat this group of athletes as though it's one server for our graphing purposes. So what I want to do is I want to say 37 miles per hour, and the ball was shanked. So we'll start capturing in a minute here. So that means the ace at 37 miles an hour. So I'm going to find 37 miles an hour, and I'm going to slide over to the very right edge of my graph and put a mark right there where the server scored an ace. Now, as these guys move through this, we're going to say 39, and I'm going to call that a 2. So the passer passed a 2, the server gets a 2. That was 39, and I'm going to give that a 3. So it means the server gets a 3. Sorry, the server gets a 1. That's an ace. The server gets a 4 at 39. And what we're going to do is we're going to start building a graph here of this server to see how effective they are at certain serves. That's a 34, and she passed a 3, which means she gets a 1. That's a 40, and I'm going to give that pass a 1, so you get a 3. 41, and she passed a 2, you get a 2. 41, and she passed a 3, so our server gets a 1. 38, and an ace, our server gets a 4. And at 40, she gets an ace, that's another 4. That is out, she gets a 0 as a server at 39. Are you guys following what we're doing here? So let's just keep following along on our graph, and I want to talk about a couple of things as they keep going. Now, you guys at the back line here that are shagging, you can switch in and be a server, okay? Let's not burn you guys all out. let's say we do 10 serves or so, but we're going to act as though those servers are one individual, and we're going to track them. And so we're going to have a graph for each individual athlete. Now, we've got a graph that you can download off of your website. What we want to do is we want to be certain that we continue to capture data until the point that we begin to see a picture emerge. So if you flip over, you're going to start to see some graphs of some athletes that have emerged over a number of serves. Now, when I did this with a team about 8 years ago, they were college athletes, and these are the actual graphs from those athletes, 18, 19, 20 years old. And these were over 5,000 serves that we captured on the team as a whole over the course of a year. You don't have to do that many serves, but you do need to get a few hundred serves in to start to capture data. Understand that the outcome of the serve is based upon the quality of the pass, and it's an inverse of the quality of the pass. Passer passes a 1, our server gets a 3. The reason we want to do it this way is because it's way too easy to be arbitrary and say, oh, that looked like a really hard serve. But in fact, it wasn't that hard for the passer. We want real data, and even though we might have some flukes where it goes off their head and it goes a perfect pass, eventually, over time, that's going to be averaged out, and we're not going to care too much about that. Now, one thing that we want to do for sure is we want to make sure that our athletes have a serving target. And as you guys continue to go, I want you to be pushing these serves so that they're a little bit harder sometimes. I want you to push your limit as an athlete, and then I want you to pull back. Find your edge for as hard as you can go. The other thing that we would be doing if we were working with these athletes, and this is really important to note, when the athlete serves the ball, in the beginning, they're going to have no idea how fast it is. Let's see how this looks. Go ahead and give us a serve. Take a guess. How fast was that? How fast was that ball? 40? It was 43. Let's go ahead and have the next one go. I want you to turn and tell me how fast you think. How fast was that? 37. Okay, step up and hit it. We want you to serve it right in front of this. How fast was that? And that's a hell of a serve. 40, very good. Great servers here. That was how fast? Ladies, we want you standing right in front of the radar gun. Yep. Keep going. So over time, what's going to happen is the athlete is going to become better and better at learning what the velocity is by the way it feels coming off of their hand. And this is vital because from this, we are going to start to identify what the proper speed is for this athlete. 42. Tell me how fast that was. How fast? It was 43. She said 35. It doesn't take many serves for them to start really understanding. How fast was that? You said 42, it was 43. How fast was that? That was 38. She said 40. Okay, I'm going to have you stop for a minute. Now let's take a look at some of these graphs and what we observe. So I'm going to take the first example when we talk about data analysis. And what we can see there is this is the top graph. We can see that as this server begins to increase their velocity, almost perfectly, it also increases their effectiveness. And that you can see that as they trend towards a faster and faster serve, they also trend towards serving so that the passers are passing ones or they are not passing the ball at all. But what happens as that server starts to go over, say, 40 miles an hour? You can see that we get some outs. So it's pretty easy from this graph to identify a couple of things about this server. One thing we observe, this is an extremely consistent server because they have very few outs, and their outs are at the higher velocity range. Another thing that we see is that I would say this athlete's optimal serve is 39 miles an hour. Now, 39 miles an hour is a pretty fast serve, and it's going to be flowing in a way that is pretty turbulent. We also see that this athlete is fairly strong. We don't have a lot of strength issues with this athlete. All of this can be identified from just looking at their graph. We can also see that anything less than 35 miles an hour is too easy for this athlete. And so I'm going to treat this athlete a certain way on the end line. Let's take a look at the next one and see what we see. What do we immediately identify that's missing from this graph? We don't have any serves that are over 42. Nothing over 40. This is not a very strong athlete. We can also identify with this athlete that they've got a scatter graph that's pretty large. That says to me that we've got an issue with ball contact. So let's talk about this for a minute. So let's move from strength to ball contact. I want you to come up here for a second, ladies, and I want you to come and approach this serve as though you were going to hit it, and then don't. Okay, I want you to toss and then not hit the ball. Okay? Let's have you follow through. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to watch where your ball lands, okay? Let's go ahead. Go ahead and toss. Great, let's see you do it again. There's your target, but that is only a target for me to look at. I want you to continue focusing on your serve. Don't focus on your toss, just toss. Okay, so you're about 2 feet ahead of that. Let's do it again. So as an athlete that I'm going to be working with, if I notice that she was inconsistent with her ball, you're right in the middle of that. Let's do it again. We're going to work on a process like this where we start to identify if our issue is the way our arm is coming through or if part of our issue is the way that the ball is being tossed. Okay, so we're pretty consistent. We're in about a 2-foot range here. And that's an issue that I definitely see with this athlete. Let's flip over the page and take another look. We've got athlete number 3 here. And again, we see something really interesting with this athlete. First thing that I observe is we've got lots of aces and lots of outs, and they're happening at a high velocity. So this is an athlete that does not struggle with strength whatsoever, but it is an athlete that has the ability to hit some aces. So I think she's probably hitting pretty good ball contact. Otherwise, that velocity would not be producing that many aces. She's got control and she's got strength. But what does this athlete lack? She lacks the ability to control herself. You can see from these serves that she's just banging this ball. And in fact, knowing who this girl was, she's an absolute beast. And she could hit this ball in control, but sometimes she just wanted to just tear the skin off of this ball. And you can see that as she's approaching 42 miles an hour, she needs to chill out and drop that ball back because she is absolutely ineffective over that speed. Last one we're going to look at. We've got a completely different graph here as well. We can see that this athlete absolutely does not lack strength. She can hit a 43-mile-an-hour ball, but she cannot keep it in the court. So I would suggest that this athlete probably has some issues with ball control, either off of the hand or with the toss or probably with both. So depending on the type of athlete that you have, based upon what you're seeing on the graphs, you can start to identify what it is that you can start to work on with this athlete. We don't need to guess at all of the random things that we're seeing. We can really start to see some things that are happening with this serve. So let's talk about a couple of more things. So, understanding velocity, I want you guys to jump in now and begin serving again. And I want to talk about something that's going to happen. So we're not going to graph them anymore. We've graphed them. We'll graph them at the beginning of the year, and then we'll let that go for a bit, and then we'll probably graph them again a little bit later. But now what we want to do is we want to flip this over to step 4, and we want to talk about velocity and understanding the way a ball flows. So let me walk you through this. Ladies, go ahead and serve. Now, if you're serving above 38 to 40, I want you to consider trying to do a couple of things. I want you to start trying to lower your trajectory, okay? If you feel that you've got good ball control, because you're getting a lot of balls in and we're not having a lot of misses, start to lower that, and let's try and get that ball between the antenna and the tape. Can we have somebody jump up and just lower that about halfway? All right, so I want you to start doing that. Now, we want to be sure, though, when we start messing with trajectory, that we want to be messing with that back line. That back line is what you want to flirt with. The reason we want to flirt with the back line, obviously, is because if we get it over the net, we have the opportunity to get it in the court. If we're flirting with the tape, we're going to have a lot of misses that are into the net that never have a chance to be passed. And we want to make sure that's not the case. Yeah, or just take the net down, either way. That's fine. Let's get you guys to start serving while they're setting that up. we get a few passes in there while they're getting that right? All right, let's talk about the physics of a ball as it moves. Sometimes we don't really think about distance from the end line that we're serving, but I think we need to, and here's the reason why. When a ball is hit at a fast velocity, it immediately moves into something called turbulent flow. Turbulent flow is a way that air moves over a ball, and if you just Google turbulent flow on the internet, you can watch air over a sphere. And what happens is as the air passes over a sphere, it immediately goes and causes these vortexes at the back of the ball. This is called vortex shedding, and what it does is it comes from one side, then another, then another, then another, and it causes a dead struck ball to move in the air. Turbulent flow is absolutely vital for us to get a float serve into that zone. How fast is turbulent flow? Well, if you really want to nerd out on this, there's something called a Reynolds number. A Reynolds number is to do with how smooth the ball is. I think there's a physics teacher nodding right here. It has something to do with how smooth the ball is, how viscous the air is, how dense the air is, how wet the air is, and how hard we hit that ball. We can see from some studies that have been done, and I've written down here the studies that are referenced, so you can take a peek and read in a lot more detail about this, at about what velocity we want to hit a ball to make sure it gets into turbulent flow. We can absolutely serve a ball over the net that is too soft to ever enter turbulent flow, and it'll be in something called laminar flow, and it will not move. But as soon as we can get it into turbulent flow, and it does not spin, we get a lot of vortex shedding, and this ball is going to float all over the place. That is what we want to get to, but there is a secret sauce that comes in the middle of these two zones, and we're going to talk about it. If you look at the ball, at the graph on the right, okay, ladies, now what I want you to start to do is if you're hitting a hard enough ball, I want you to step back 10 feet and hit that same ball, and then I want you to continue to move back as far as you can to still put that ball into the court. If we look at this graph here on the right, I want to walk you through it. What is happening is a ball that enters turbulent flow moves in a very erratic fashion for a period of time at a high velocity. And we can see that in the volleyball world, that is at about 49 miles an hour down to about 22 miles an hour. So there's a massive range here. No, I'm sorry, 49 is too high. That's a smooth ball. We're talking about 35 miles an hour, 34 miles an hour, down to 22 miles an hour. Now, what's happening in that zone from about 35 miles an hour to 22 miles an hour is the ball is decelerating and it hits something called a drag crisis. And you need to write that down if you don't know what it is, because what is happening, you hit that ball quick, it is turbulent. As it slows down, it's going to go into laminar flow where the air is flowing very smooth over that ball, and that acts almost like a parachute on the end of a race car. And it immediately creates a ton of drag, and what does drag do to a ball? It decelerates it. So as these guys are serving in this range, what we want to do is we want to find a serve that is appropriate for our type of ball, the viscosity of the air, and that has everything to do with how high we are in the mountains or if we're on the beach, and the quality of the air. And you want to start to identify the range where these balls are going to start dropping out of the sky. So unless we have an absolutely flat ball, it won't happen. But I'm sure you've all seen that serve that comes, and then the libero just falls on their face because that ball fell out of the sky. That is a ball that has been in turbulent flow, that has gone over the net, and as it enters the passing zone, it hits the drag crisis and slows to a stop. So, how do we find that? Well, we really have to identify a couple of things. One, we have to know that it exists. And then two, we have to identify what an athlete can actually do with the ball. If we're hitting the ball too hard as an athlete, it's never going to float because they're going to be spinning it off their sides. So, at what point can the athlete hit their best serve? And then, how far away from the end line do we need to move them to make sure that that ball is going slow enough as it passes the net to enter into a drag crisis where it's then going to drop. Anybody with me? Any question on this? Turbulent flow, hitting a drag crisis at a certain speed and dropping into laminar flow where it then just hits the floor. We want that to occur just before the pass occurs. So, as these guys are serving, we want to start thinking about that. A couple more things we want to add on before we end this session here. When we're trying to decide where an athlete is serving from, a couple of things need to come in mind. Have you guys been switching around? Okay, great. Let's keep going. Keep serving them through. We want to observe that laminate flow. So I want you to stop for a second, and I want you to start to think about, okay, I want to watch where I'm seeing a passer try and track that ball, and then I see a sudden forward move. It may be that we are hitting the ball so hard as a server that we're just serving them right through that turbulent flow, and it's turbulent the whole way. And we're not giving ourselves a chance to ever hit laminar flow, okay? So we want a turbulent ball, but we don't want it so turbulent that it continues to be turbulent the whole way, okay? So let's try and start to find that sweet spot, and let's, as coaches, try to start identifying where it's occurring. And if we can get both turbulent flow and then also at times find that space where it falls into a drag crisis as it's hitting laminar flow, that is going to be the absolute sweet spot of the serve. So, things we want to mess with. Well, number one, if I have an athlete that is strong enough to hit this ball, I'm probably going to want to move them back. I think a ball at that speed is probably too fast to ever hit laminar flow. That was a great serve, but again, I think that would have been a greater serve if you were 5 feet back from the end line. Okay, so let's try these serves, starting here and maybe attacking the ball here. Okay? So we need to start identifying trajectory number one. We want our serves to be flat and clean. If we've got an athlete that has excellent control, we want to start to bring them down, and we want to make sure that we are flirting with that end line, not the tape, although we want to try and get close to the tape. Let's flip over and now talk about step 6, tactical serving philosophy. As your athletes get better ball contact and have better control and better strength, we can then begin to be tactical. We want to think about a bunch of things. And you need to identify your own serving philosophy. When do you absolutely need a ball in the court? I think a lot of us would say, well, after a timeout. That's a pretty devastating place to have a miss. If you come out and you've been iced out by the other team and you've got to hit a ball into the court, that might be a good time. The first serve of the match might be a time where you say, okay, we are absolutely in control. Game or match point, after a long rally, change in momentum. We need to start thinking about all of these things to identify our serving philosophy. So we cannot be saying to an athlete, serve it hard, but serve it in. You can't have it both ways. We've got to pick which one. And we want to identify for each athlete how many is acceptable. Sometimes we say as a team, you know what, we're gonna allow 4 serves that are out this match. Well, if you've got your worst servers on the court right now because they're your best defensive players, maybe that isn't appropriate. Maybe we want to make that 6. So we want to identify how many outs are appropriate for each athlete on the team. We want to limit the number of options to the opposite team, and we want to physically tax members of the opposition. So, as we look at that, let's talk about our serving zones and what we do with calling serves and hitting zones. So I would suggest that there are probably 6 different tactical ways that we can approach the serve. Number 1 is going to be the end line. The end line is probably the most effective zone that we can go for because it exists over the width of the court. It's not a specific zone that we need to hit. So for an athlete, say for example, that has poor ball control, as I've identified with my graph, I'm going to say to them, let's stop serving right here on the very edge of the court because you're missing a lot to the outside. Let's move a poor ball contact server into the center of the court, and we're going to say to them, keep that ball off the tape and let's go after that end line. Number 2 is going to be seams. We want to start to hit seams. So athletes, let's see what we can do now to start being tactical with our serves, okay? What I want you to do is go after the seams between the two players. I don't want you to put a ball on that center player or the edge players. I want to put it in between. Okay? And let's see how effective we can be there. Third zone. Third zone is a zone that we don't want to mess with unless we are an absolutely good server, and that is sideline serving. A serve from this position to this position down the line, if I can hit a turbulent flow that enters laminate flow with a drag crisis, is going to be highly effective, but it is also very risky for an athlete that doesn't have the skills to do so. So get those athletes that can't handle ball control and move them into the center of the court. We want to also talk about short serves into the two position. We're going to try some of those serves here now. All right, ladies, I want you to try this. I want you to hit this ball. I want you to look as though you're being aggressive. I want you to maybe look at a different zone, and then I want you to drop that ball with inside the 10-foot line here, right on the server's head, or sorry, the setter's head. Okay? So let's see if you can put that ball right in here and see how it looks. We want to be deceptive with this, too hard. Let's see if we can drop a ball into that zone. This is a great serve for an athlete that maybe doesn't have that strength, that can't get a ball into turbulent flow. But if she's got great ball contact, this might be a great serve. John Dunning at Stanford had an athlete that could serve this ball, and she was highly effective at that. So this is one that we want to be sure that we can just drop into that zone. Want to have it drop out of the sky. All right, we got 2 minutes to talk about this last bit here. The last thing we do once we've organized a graph for each of our athletes, and we've identified what their weaknesses are. We've identified that maybe they're not strong enough, that maybe they're not thinking enough about where they're hitting the ball, if they're just blasting away at zones. Whatever the weakness is, maybe they have a bad toss that we've identified. Maybe their arm swing is bad. We then want to establish a roadmap for each athlete. And I would say there's probably 6 things that we could talk about. It would be strength, it would be ball contact, it would be toss, it would be strength broken up into both core and shoulder, wrist, elbow, forearm strength. And then I think mental drills is another thing that we can look at as well. So for this athlete, with this graph right here, I'm going to say that she's going to need some strength exercises for sure. So I'm going to go on Art of Coaching site and I'm going to look at some med-core ball obliques. I'm just going to search on the site for core strength exercises, and a bunch will come up. I want to also look at arm and shoulder strength exercises. So I put in some band work with this kid, some fingertip push-ups, some forearm wrist ball roll-ups. Individual drills, I definitely want a standing ball toss to floor target, and I want her to identify over and over, is that happening? If she's got a bad toss, I maybe want to look at a two-hand toss. I may want to look at an opposite hand toss. There are kids that toss that way. Find the best way for them. Team drills. There's a speed drill that we do with the radar gun. It's called the Barnard Speed Drill. It's on our website. It's a great drill. Acer Out Drill. Dunning Alternate Score Drill. Again, some things that you can Google. If you just Google team drills for serving effectiveness on our website. Sorry, not Google, but search. And then certainly mental skills. Slow down and breathe. Another great thing is a book called The Inner Game of Tennis. Using this process to identify what kind of a server you have and what their weaknesses are going to give you a roadmap to start to put them into a way that they can be a lot more effective.